So this is a video that's long past due. I've had a lot of requests to do VFX breakdowns or at least explaining certain effects or why I did certain things, and I decided to finally sit down and do a director's commentary. So let's just go ahead and get right into it, starting with the intro. The first third of the intro is just pre-animated intros. There's the Halo's Back logo because this was submitted for the 2020 montage competition. Then there's Beau's standard Office Hyena intro, the Mantra Esports logo, and the Halo Pro logo, which you'll actually notice that the native resolution of this is 420 by 316, so pretty low compared to the actual final render, which is 1080p. So there's a feature in DaVinci Resolve called Superscale, which lets you upscale footage up to a factor of 4. And you can see, go ahead and look at the preview when I disable this, the difference. You'll see how much sharper it gets when I enable the Superscale. So I did that to kind of denoise it a bit and make it look, I guess, more modern. But other than that, the intro is pretty basic. I guess the only stylization that I came up with on my own was to accent the reds instead of just desaturating the whole thing. So any instance of red is fully saturated, but no additional saturation was given. Just because I think that kind of fit the theme to accent that color. Everything else is desaturated to either half or a quarter saturation. Now, the way the intro was actually handled is not my idea. Originally, Beau had started Death Machine 3 on his own, and there were a completely different set of clips. Those were all used in leftover videos by the time Death Machine 3 came out. But when he asked me to pick up this project, he swapped everything out, but he did send me an original render of what he was doing with this. It was the same dialogue with some background music mixed in. And there were two key points in the way he handled the editing. The first is that he synced the gunshots on plosives and other notable consonants. If you don't know what plosives are, they're heavy consonants such as K, T, B, P. Like they stand out more than like an S or like an F. Those are softer consonants. So because they stand out more, he would heavily emphasize having sync points on those. And if you watch here, you can see that.
Wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at the
like the B's on those, blue meanie with a bomb. But there are other consonants that I sync to as well, just to maintain pacing.
think that I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at
But that general style is not my idea. That actually came from Beau's original render. The other thing too is that he did not jump cut between any shots or stuff like that. It was a shot and then any middle ground was sped up, which if you've seen my other videos, I don't do that a whole lot, but I did that a lot throughout this video because again, that came from how Beau had started this video. And one of the things I wanted to emphasize is making sure that this is his video, not only his video, but one of his biggest videos that have ever come out. So it needs to be his style. But other than that and the accented red, there's really not much going on editing-wise for this intro until we get to the very end here, which is the title screen. So this was all done in Fusion. And I'll go ahead and open my node graph here. If we take a look, there's a few things going on. This view might look a little bit scary to those of you that do not use node-based compositing software. But long story short, nodes are a flow graph of functions instead of layers. So anytime you see a merge node, that's a layer. What I started off with was this footage right here. So this is green screen footage, which Beau had sent me. And I use a delta keyer, which is essentially a chroma keyer, but really powerful. So that cuts out the green. Then I have a transform node to kind of zoom it in a little bit, not a whole lot. You can see the offset from the actual canvas size. And then this merge node, this is the foreground. And the foreground contains the 3D text. And there's a few things going on with the 3D text. First of all is this woodfire texture. This actually comes from BCC Extruded Text, which is a plugin for 3D text. I used to have to use that in Vegas because it doesn't have native 3D texting tools. And there is a folder with all their preset textures. So I actually liked a lot of the textures they had, and I just extracted that to my own folder and used this texture. And then I applied a transform that spun over time. So you can see it's rotating in the viewer to make it more dynamic. And I also mirrored the edge here so that it wouldn't just be black if it crossed over here. Like this would be black if I didn't mirror it, for example. And because it's 3D text in a 3D environment, such as this, I needed to give it some lights. So it has a backlight and a front light. And the front light is just white to give it some brightness, but the backlight is designed to imitate the orange hue of this effect that I have in the background, which I'll go into in a moment. And after the, so this is the foreground layer, if you want to think of it that way. And this is the background layer, which is just the chroma keyed Spartan. After that is a color correction, because if I actually take this off, you'll see the Spartan is not actually graded the way I'd want it to. It's just the plain yellow, same with the text. So I wanted to match that more with the background. I just added a reddish hue to it, really basic. And then here, there's another merge node. So this is a background to that. And what's in the background is just a background node to give the effect something to sit on. And then there's particle illusion, which, by the way, the standalone version of this is actually free. If you're into particles or any kind of particle-based system, this is a great software that you should pick up. It's compatible with any editing software that you use. But going in here, this is what the original thing looked like. It was green, obviously not what you're seeing here because I hue shifted it with the color corrector right here, just to make it red, kind of matching that red isolation that I gave with the rest of the desaturation. And particle illusion itself, this is pretty much a preset. I did not do much to customize it because I already knew what this looked like, having used the software before. Enter particle illusion. Oh, there we go. So this is the software. Ignore this. This is a different thing entirely. But this is probably under Vortex. One of these presets, I'm sure it was based on. Oh, Warp Pool is what it was called, actually. Warp Pool 081. Okay, so there you go. You can see this looks an awful lot like what was used. So I really just scaled it up. I changed essentially the speed of the animation and a couple other things. But again, I hue shifted it in post to be red. And then I had 3D text and the chroma keyed Spartan over it. And that's all it is. So it looks like this will want to pre-render, so it's not going to play back at full speed. But that's the intro. Starting with song 1. I'm really not a fan of the way song 1 was handled on my end. And the reasoning behind that is this song was edited after almost everything else. So there's the intro, song 1, and song 2. I don't consider the intro song 1 because it's mostly dialogue. So song 2, I started this project with first because this song is called Contact Note by John Hopkins. And I had listened to John Hopkins for quite a while before I picked up Death Machine 3. And I thought this song would fit really well with this project. And I trimmed it out a lot. and got it to where I wanted it to be, to where all the gameplay would fit and the pacing was right. And I already had ideas for the song, having listened to it before the project started. So because of that, things went a lot smoother with this song. And a lot of the things you saw, I had basically preconceived before I even had gameplay. This song, however, was just kind of thrown in last second. So there was no premeditated effects. Everything was just on the spot. Therefore, it was very unoriginal. And also, the song itself, I wasn't a huge fan of it thematically in the way it sounded, in contrast to the intro and song 2. The reason I chose this song is because the video Skeleton that Hyena released however long ago, it was edited by Zestel. And that's one of my favorite videos that they've ever put out. The original render of Skeleton used this song. And it's actually from the same soundtrack that was used in the final render of Skeleton. So I kind of wanted to do a small throwback to that. And there were some very small references that I made to that video in this. So that's the reasoning that I chose the song, because we were really struggling to find something that fit thematically with the other two. And it's not really the ideal candidate, but it's what we settled on. But going into it, there is this intro, which originally was different. I actually had an angle on Terminal starting in one of the tunnels on the map, and the train kind of flew into the camera, and then it was a jump cut to the next angle, which, let's see, what did I use here? I think this was going to be the second angle anyway, but the first angle was originally Terminal, and Bo asked me not to use it because the map Terminal is never present in the video. So he only wanted angles that were from clips that existed in the video otherwise. So that got scrapped, and instead there was this kind of straightforward angle, which wasn't very dynamic. Again, it was kind of a last minute thing thrown in there because of that change. But for this angle, this is pretty much exactly how I already envisioned it being. And here we threw the cipher on it. Oh, I wonder if the cipher isn't showing on here because the font used doesn't exist on this computer. Okay, so I'm gonna do that. There we go. Yeah, I edited this on a laptop and just ported the project over here, so my fonts aren't carried over. So yeah, the cipher itself wasn't very hard to put in. It's just motion tracked with a planar track in Fusion and a multiply blend mode. I used that for most of the text and objects that were motion tracked in this video because I think it looks good. Moving forward from the intro though, we have this other angle, which isn't all that exciting, but it's used to introduce the first clip. This is an effect I've specifically had questions on from other people, and it's a lot easier than you think because I did a very sloppy job with it. You'll notice that if we look here, that mask is pretty hideous, and there's also some bleed through on the sniper. But that's because I spent about 30 seconds on this. Now, how did I do this without masking? There's a really cool tool in Resolve called the Qualifier. So, okay, well, I just changed something from my original project setting, so now it looks messed up. But anyways, going here, this is one of those things that, again, lack of originality that I really wish would have been handled differently if I had a song that was kind of pre-planned. This inversion effect, I guess it kind of matches what you're hearing. That's the reason I did it. But it's done repeatedly throughout the video, and it gets repetitive, and I'm sure that that got very boring to look at. It's also very obstructive to visibility, and it's okay in places where the shot hasn't happened yet, but I do this in places where it gets in the way of visibility and should have been handled differently. But here you can see the same thing where between shots I mostly did speed ups because I wanted to remain thematically accurate to how Bo edited the intro. Because this is not normally how I handle stuff. I'll usually jump cut or do a luminizol between spots within a clip. And that's going to be a reoccurring theme throughout the video. And again, this is just another warp repeat. As a transition, we wanted to get context of killing the player and having them get spawn stuck. Thankfully, Bo did have some first-person perspectives from the people he killed, so that helped me give some context. Because I'm really not much of an angle person when I edit either, but things like this would really benefit from context, especially considering he was looking away during the time that the explosion took place. As for how this was done, this is just a standard angle. I literally went on MCC with the blind skull in a custom game and walked forward. That's why you can see some bumpiness. Honestly, if I took more care of this, I could have stabilized it vertically, so you wouldn't see that. But to get the BR to show up, there is a map on Halo 2 Vista that's basically just a giant green screen. So I would take the footage, and in Fusion, this would just be the base footage, the green screen. I chroma keyed it, and there's the BR without the green screen. And then I would just take the part where I was switching weapons, and then it would line up relatively with where the gameplay began. Now, obviously, that's a little sketchy that the player just shows up, but in full speed, that detail doesn't really get noticed much. So you can have some slight inaccuracies like that, and it's okay to the audience's eye. But I could have done a little bit better on matching the color. You'll notice that this is also a little sharper because this is a 720p clip. And also, if I wanted to be really nitpicky, I could have matched the bullet count. But details like that were omitted for the sake of actually getting the project done on time. Because for those that don't know, this video was actually released on Bo's birthday. So if I spent a lot more time, that deadline would not have been met. Continuing forward, there's just more of the inversion, which, again, more cases where it really shouldn't have happened because that obstructs a lot of visibility. During these sections, the song changes to be more slow-paced. There's less instrumentation. The percussion is less busy. So this is where I wanted to slow down and take the non-multi-kill clips, because as the song changed, I thought maybe the genre of the clips should change. In this case, we went to the more creative type clips. And as you can see here, they're not exactly multi-kill based. So that's the type of pattern that I wanted to follow for the song change. And here, there's a small little motion graphics thing. I actually did some things to learn new capabilities when working on this project. And this was one that I was kind of curious about. This is also not the same as the original render because I guess through the process of porting this project to my PC, it's different. Anyways, this arrow is supposed to be motion tracked. Let me disable this, bring this into Fusion real quick. Okay, now if I bring this back in, okay, well, there is a discrepancy for some reason. I guess I should expect this because it was edited on a completely different device. But anyways, all I did here was draw an arrow, and it kind of just showed the path of this player being pushed by the sword. And what was done here is I drew the arrow with Universe HUD components, and the path was drawn with a spline, and I attached the motion over time to that spline. I'm not going to go into all the details on how to do that, but that's basically all I did. And it was the first time I had done it. It was kind of me teaching myself how to do something in Fusion. But moving on from that, this effect, again, kind of a lazy effect, but it was done because kind of matched the song, I guess. Had like a distorted sound, and so I wanted to distort the video. But it also didn't take me much time because thankfully DaVinci Resolve has motion tracked masking. So instead of using a qualifier, all I did was slap a mask that was motion tracked, and then I added Sapphire Distort Chroma. That's really about it. I didn't change many of the parameters, but I did keyframe it to show up over time and then disappear. You may notice that during these transitional sections, I added a zoom blur to kind of add to the speed of it. So I didn't want it to just look like, oh, we're speeding up the clip. I wanted it to be viewed as it's actually going fast, like in real time. Not that it actually was, but that's just the kind of interpretation I wanted from it. This is one of those very small skeleton references. There were times where Howard would accent certain shots with a primarily black and white effect. This is not the exact effect. In fact, I think this one is just BCC charcoal. Yeah, charcoal sketch. Honestly, there are probably better effects to get this look, but it's not designed to look pretty. It's just to very quickly accent something and invert how bright it is, just so that it's like, oh, something happened. Like, that's what you think, but you don't have to really sit there and inspect it frame by frame. And there's the same thing here, just a little accenting shot. Just a small black and white for maybe 2 or 3 frames. This effect doesn't pre-cache properly. It's a glitch with using plugins and OFX alpha handling. But what I did for this is I used an effect called S-Cartoon Ray. Oh, no, BCC Cartoon Rays, I believe. Let's check it out. Yep, Rays Cartoon. And what this does is essentially the cartoon threshold is how much it'll actually take footage and apply this effect to it. And I just animated that over time so that it would start from nothing and then slowly add it into view. And you can kind of tell, oh wait, are those hands and something that he's holding? And eventually you can tell what the clip is. So I just wanted to do more than a fade. I wanted to dissolve it as an effect. I've actually done this effect before in one of my videos. I will probably put some text on the screen saying what video it is if you want to check it out later, but I start the video with the same exact concept. Let's see, for this, nothing special. It's just this effect here is called Universe Ecto. Okay, so you'll notice I just had a jump cut there because Resolve had a GPU error when I tried to process this. The reasoning behind that is because the optical flow on this is very intensive. So that combined with a CPU bound effect kind of made it not want to cooperate. Anyways, moving to the angle afterwards, this is out of the map on Warlock. This is using Blue Trainer on Halo 2 Vista. And I was going to use the same continuity before where I used Warp Transform, but I instead used a 3D switch pan to zoom in, basically. This is some actual angle work. Normally I don't bother with this, but I felt it was needed to fill up space and help the pacing. Instead of just like speeding up or slowing down the grenade toss and whatever, it would make it a little more dynamic. This shot was actually not with Blue Trainer. I got out of the map and sat on one of these ledges just on the opposite side of the map, and it was perfectly level with the grenade. So that just kind of worked out. And I added a dynamic zoom to it. And then it gets the kill there. And there was just another little thing with the little accent with the black and white. And again, the song repeats to this type of pattern. So I went to the same type of clips to, again, follow that thematically. So these are the non-multi-kill type clips. And this is just another continuity angle. And there are two aspects to it. And one is the BR being lowered. So this is just a green screen footage, as you can see, I keyed it out. And then the other is an angle. This is me just walking on MCC, speeding it up, adding the zoom blur. And then in this case, I didn't have to do the BR coming back up because the clip starts at this point with a scope in. So there was a little bit that I did here to try and maintain visibility. This clip is particularly dark, and I didn't want to brighten the whole thing, and it hasn't been a visibility issue until this point. So what I did is you'll notice that the inside of the scope is actually a little brighter than the outside because I just masked it and then added a small white glow. And using that same mask, I did the inverse and used Chroma Distort just to, I guess, kind of match the song again. And yet another continuity sequence there. This angle took us forever. It was me, Zutrucchio, and Furion that worked on this. I think I was the dummy here. Zutrucchio was the camera, and Furion was standing up on P2. And the amount of times we had to do this to get the the ricochet to hit the player at the right point, and it took us, I want to say, over half an hour just to get this one angle, despite how simple it is. So and this is just like super slow motion with some optical flow. I keyframed some red glow in and some screen shake, faded to white. And then on here, not much really to talk about on this, but I did add a small bit of depth of field with lens blur. Here's a before and after. So I wanted to add some focus on the Spartan. And this blood is actually in the frame. This blood is not. I actually planar tracked it in Fusion. And here you can see there's some blood from Ignite Blood Spray. And I skewed it over a corner positioner and masked it so it didn't bleed into the wall right here. So it's just a little bit of detail. I felt like there wasn't enough blood, so I added some. And it was out of focus too, so it really helped blend it in. It was another multiply blend mode, so it almost matched the exact color, despite the fact that this red is obviously not this red. So that just kind of worked out, and I think it looked pretty good. Don't know if anybody noticed that detail, but it was designed to be subtle. So there's another warp transform transition. And there's the first quad-shot Jaro, and just some optical flow on the end of this. This is the first song that I actually edited in this project. It was even before the dialogue intro, I believe. Could be wrong on that, though. For this intro, this is simply a falling angle I recorded on MCC. I put the gravity of the player and the world gravity all the way down so that I could jump super high. And the start of this angle is actually me still jumping upwards. And it doesn't start falling down until the blur starts to blend to 0. I've gotten a few comments from the judges on this that it seemed very abrupt to have this effect. And I don't know if they were listening with headphones or maybe they still thought it was abrupt after the fact, but if you have headphones, you can hear a bass tone that plays right here. And I wanted it to sync with that bass tone to have like a drastic change in visuals. So I can understand people don't like that, but that was my intention with it. And this effect is, yet again, Universe Ecto. It was the same thing I used on that text. And there's a dual color thing going on, and was not actually my original intention. I have been asked about that. The way this effect works is there's, yet again, an alpha channel and a non-alpha layer that it interacts with. So I did a Luma key to essentially cut out the brightest parts of the image. And you can see that here. This is just luminance. And the part selected, oh, I guess you can't see it with the effect, but the brightest portions, or the sky below the map, is what got keyed out. And so it applied this to the edge of it. And this is the look I wanted, but I originally wanted it to be one color. The reason it's two colors is because there's an inner and an outer color to the fire or the plasma, whatever you want to call it. And the inner color is exactly as it sounds, but how it works is that anything that's small details will not show an outer color because it can't really represent it. It's just by the time the next point of contrast shows up, the new inner color fades in. So this is a very noisy area, and so it has just the inner color of the blue, and the red comes from the more open and spacious spots where it's not competing with it, but you can still see the very light blue on the edges. That's why it looks kind of purplish, because red and blue makes purple. And as it plays through, it just kind of does its thing. I actually recorded this angle on Vista. It's an upside down angle using Blue Trainer, and I'm just fading backwards. This is, top mid and library, as you can see, and BR1 to BR2. And it still has the duality aspect of the blue and red. Now, the reason I kept it is because I thought, basically, oh, well, that looks cooler. But it wasn't originally intended. But I added a lot of motion blur to this because when I recorded on my laptop, I would never get perfect frame rate in game because it had NVIDIA Optimus, which means that it renders my display with Intel graphics and runs more intensive things like editing software and games on the NVIDIA graphics card. So it would do some weird process to get that to work when I'm running the game full screen, and I would never get a perfect frame rate. So it was really choppy, and I had to add RSMB to try and smoothen it out. And you can still see some unevenness in the motion keyframes when it plays at full speed. It won't in my software right now because, again, the alpha channel makes it not pre-cached properly. This transition here is just a matter of me reducing the qualification with the luminance channel. So as the Luma key fades, less things become visible, and it does this really cool fire transition. I do this on a lot of videos. It's just a really cool effect that's so easy to do. And here, this is just using optical flow because there were some turning and missed shots that I didn't want to keep in the video. And then I just do a blur in. And on this next effect, right here, I've had a few, well, more than a few questions on how I did this, actually. So this is, yet again, using the qualifier. And you can do this in Fusion. Honestly, any plugin that I use could be done in Fusion, but I wasn't as fluent in Fusion at the time of this project and was very heavily dependent on plugins because that's what I had to use in Vegas for all my VFX. But with the qualifier, this was made very easy. Essentially, I took a qualification of certain areas. You can see these gray areas are the ones that are not affected. So that includes the plasma explosion, the text, and this piece right here. I wanted to keep some edge pieces to show that things were tilting away instead of just going backwards. So if you have 2 points one in the standard depth and one actually fading away, it shows a change in parallax. So the way this works is when you enable the effect, you can see that these components are not moving, showing their standard depth, and everything else is tilting away. And this was done with S-Warp Transform. So this is just a transform effect, which normally is a property that you can do in your editing software, but combined with the qualifier and being able to isolate what actually gets tilted in 2.5D allows me to make this effect. So you can see the whole plane of everything mirrored and tilting backwards while the other components remain stationary. And that gives this kind of spacey, interdimensional look of like the map falling away from you. So that's all that is. It really wasn't complicated to do. All I did was do keyframes on a pivot in a tilt, both in the Z and the X axis. And then I just mirrored the edge so it would reflect into infinity, essentially. And right here, this is just another continuity transition. All I did here was planar track a gyro metal onto the floor and a little quad shot thing, just alluding to the fact that the next clip is a quad shot gyro. And same thing here. The BR was chroma keyed. It fades into the frame. And the rest is just an angle. It's quite a rough jump cut, but again, when it's full speed like that, the viewer doesn't really catch that unless they inspect it frame by frame. And this is just a standard glitch effect. I think it was this BCC video glitch? Yes, BCC video glitch, and I just gave it a very basic mask. Mostly motion tracked. It didn't have to be very specific. Just had to make sure that it didn't obscure the footage. So that was quite an easy effect to do. And this glitch effect I use throughout the video because that's just kind of the visual representation of what I hear in my mind. And again, a lot of the things in this song are things that I just kind of thought of before even coming up with the project ideas because I had heard the song before. And I do that a lot. I'll listen to music and I will have editing ideas before I even edit a project. So this glitch effect is one of those recurring themes that I would visualize as I'm listening to the song. So these effects here are just designed to kind of maintain pacing because they couldn't be sped up because then they would not sync properly, and I didn't want to just speed up the footage and then add an unnecessary angle. But just a little detail on this, this was also qualified, so you'll notice the points of the subject are left in frame for visibility purposes. And here, this is another reoccurring theme that I think just matched audibly with the visuals. And this is just a chroma blur, no, sapphire distort blur? Which one is this? Yeah, so distort blur. And all I did here was have a small mask, again for visibility purposes. So it will blur everything around the subject so you could get the effect you wanted and not destroy what the audience is supposed to be looking at. And this is just a cheeky little masking transition here. And I wanted these two clips to be next to each other because I knew that the transition would be so easy. Like I immediately thought of this because it's like, oh, they're in the same area and you pass in front of that column. So, you know, easy mask. And these two effects are yet again just qualifiers. Zertruchio makes fun of me because every time there's a plasma pistol shot in a clip, I always do something to it. But in this case, Bo specifically asked me to do something to this, so you can't bitch at me for that one. But it was a very easy matter of just qualifying green, because this is the most green thing on the screen. And I lowered the threshold so it didn't include the reflections, because in this case, I didn't want it to. Some people could argue that that's a compositing flaw. In this case, I wanted to when it was really close, but I wanted it to maintain most of the green ambience throughout the shot. So it has that cool little distortion look. This is, yet again, just another qualification. All I did was qualify this color right here, the whole wall texture, and it isolated the Spartan and the VR and the radar components or other HUD components. So that made it quite easy. This is another complaint I got from a few judges, rightfully so. The arrow is just kind of here, and yes, it's motion tracked the way it should be, but quite honestly, the amount of brightness and blue really should have been toned down to something that matched the scene better. So I do agree with them that this was a bit out of place, but it was obviously just to show, oh, look that way. Just a little detail I felt like adding in. But you can see the glitch and the distort were yet again reoccurring themes. And here I made sure to mask out this section so it didn't get in the way. More continuity angles and another little skeleton flash, if you want to call it that, as a little accent. This, I actually had an original idea for it and ended up not going through with it because I'm a piece of shit. So I did a render, the first render of Death Machine 3 where I thought everything was done. I had some motion tracking up here and I had a specific notation telling me exactly what to do. And then I noticed, oh shit, I left my in progress notation in the final render. So I just kind of took it out and didn't go through with it. But what I was going to do was have a Spartan chasing another Spartan. It would just be a green screen thing, and I'd turn them into white mats. So it would be two little Spartans like following each other, and it'd be planar tracked on this wall. But instead, I just got lazy, and I did a little temporal defocus thing. This is another effect that's not going to pre-cache properly because of alpha handling. But all I did was take some light rays and take their center point as the grenade. So I followed things as it went along. And there were a few little details on this one. So the first one is the rocket launcher, which has a little tri-forked lens flare thing on it. I'm sure some people noticed that. I wanted it to kind of give the idea of like a homing missile thing. And once it impacted, all I did was some pseudo color, masked around everything but the subject, because yet again, I wanted to maintain visibility on it. And this part was, I don't know. I had to do something to spice up the angle because I wanted to add another first-person to first-person continuity. So here, this is the first-person angle of the person dying on the bottom level to the rocket. And so the next clip takes place above the base. So I thought, well, how do I connect that? An angle going from here through the window and to the player. Well, in the end, the angle didn't matter because you can't really see it at all, because I did this weird, funky transitional thing. All this is a plugin called Infinite Zoom. And I just keyframed the amount of how zoomed it is, I guess, over time. But I did carefully match it to the beat. It actually took a lot of time to make it look synchronized with what you're hearing. But everything else was easy. It was literally just that effect. And then I did a quick little dissolve into first person. This is where you can start to see the angle is here, and then first person, I'm kind of looking at the cliff here. And then just to make it a little more wacky, I added some chroma distort on here on the layer that had the Sapphire Infinite Zoom effect. Now, if you really want to see how boring this angle was without effects, I'll show you. It's quite silly. So when I saw the angle, I was like, yeah, I have to spice that up somehow. There's no way I can leave it in there because it doesn't match the pace of the video at all. So this ended up becoming this. And a detail I forgot to mention, you may have noticed that there is a vignette around all instances of the other person's perspective. So when Beau gets a clip on someone and they have their perspective as part of the context, I always put a vignette showing that it's their perspective. And I don't really know why that is the exact choice that I've made. I think because it doesn't do too much to the clip, but it still shows that there's a difference. But I've actually done that even for Beau's prior video that I made for him called Humbling River. Any instance of the other person's perspective, I would throw a vignette on there. So moving on from this angle, with every quad shot going on here, I added a zoom blur just to accent every single one of them. But I didn't want to go overboard on it, and I feel like in the end you don't actually really see it. I'm not sure if people picked up on the detail because it's, I don't know, it just kind of blends in. I probably should have accented it more. This is one of those things that really should not have been in the video. This is like super lazy, adding the behind you text that you've probably seen in 100 Tages, and just to make it even worse, it's purple, and there's no purple in this scene. It just sticks out like a sore thumb. So I literally could have done anything else in this and it would have looked better. But as for how I did it, it was a very simple planar track, because you'll notice it actually moves with the motion of the player. I just took tracking data from the ceiling and offset it down. And for this clip, I wanted to be very careful with all the quad shots to not put any cuts in between. I wanted to be absolutely certain that you could tell there were no missed shots between all three quad shots, just to emphasize how really impressive this clip is. I mean, it's already crazy, but just in case anyone had brought it into question, like, oh, were there missed shots in between? Is there any editing? No, it's exactly as it happened in the clip. And just to accent it, I added a little bit of dynamic zoom. As he does the first quad shot, I zoom in and do the zoom blur, and then reduce the zoom blur and actually move out as the quad shot goes away. And I do that for all three of them as just a form of accenting what's happening. And this ending here, unfortunately, he dies on the exact frame that the clip ends, so I wasn't really able to do much. All I could do was optical flow it, because if I added an angle at the end, it just cuts away from the fact that he got a Jaro. You can't cut away from it too soon. So there's some sloppy optical flow, but I did the best I could to keep it clean and then fade it out. And then it's just standard scrolling credits. This is a small 3D piece made by Ernest. I probably could have made this on my own if I spent enough time on it, but honestly, it's a great help that he spent the time with the 3D while I worked on everything else in the video, because I may not have met the deadline if he didn't do this for us. So he added that with the blood on it. Nice little detail. Obviously that's there because he dies at the very end of the angle, and it's just continuity to that. Otherwise, this is just an image with a dynamic zoom, but I actually wanted to have something different in the credits. But this was changed because of the same logic as the terminal angle that was cut, where Beau only wanted angles that were from gameplay that actually existed in the video. So I originally had this custom map on Halo 2 Vista. It was like this factory map that had some like flashing lights to it, and it was kind of like really ominous, especially with the color correction and the vignette on it. And what I wanted to do was the camera, or just a stationary player without a HUD, was on a track that was going through the map, and as it went through, there would be a text saying like "Thanks for watching" at the end. Then it would just be like 3D camera tracked in there, and then as it went forward, it would like pass through the text, and the video would be over. But just like the ominous like flashing red lights and the factory setting, there's this sound in the background of the song that kind of matches with that, which is what made me think of. It was actually just the flashing lights alone that made me think of that. There's like this, almost like an alarm going off, I think is the way to explain it. So the red lights are kind of like that in the factory, but I had to do away with that. But the cool thing is, because I didn't do that angle, that means I didn't use a studio exclusive feature. So this entire project could have been edited in the free version of DaVinci Resolve. So, and I didn't realize that until Zertrukio pointed it out to me, but it's a pretty cool thought. But aside from that, I believe that's it for this breakdown. There's not a whole lot else to discuss other than things that I would do in every single video. I wanted to point out the things that are specific to this video. Depending on if people actually like this, I will make some other VFX breakdowns / director commentaries. The only other one I potentially have planned is my video called Pendulum. I've had a lot of questions on that video as well. So if you guys do like this video, let me know what you think.